My name is Prince Talal bin Rashid, and I am 28 years old. And on the night of June 4th, 2021, my life was supposed to be destroyed forever. That was the night the royal court ordered me to marry my own sister as punishment for refusing to abandon my new Christian faith. But before the ceremony could begin, Jesus Christ broke open a path no man could have created, and a supernatural flash flood swept through Riyadh without warning. Today, I speak to you from a secure location, no longer a Saudi prince bound by royal chains, but a free man saved by the living Son of God. I was born in Riyadh, inside one of the royal compounds where members of our extended family live. Because my father is a nephew to a former king of Saudi Arabia, I grew up surrounded by wealth, privilege, and strict expectations. The palace walls that protected us from the outside world also kept us far away from ordinary life. I was born with a rare heart condition that caused sudden fainting, sharp pain, and episodes of breathlessness. From childhood, my life revolved around doctors, injections, private medical rooms, and emergency checks. My father ordered that my condition should never be discussed outside the palace. In royal families, weakness is seen as a threat, so my illness became a silent secret that shaped everything about my childhood. Islam surrounded my daily life from the moment I could walk. I learned Quran recitation before I learned to write properly. We had private imams from Mecca and Medina who visited the palace to teach us. Every morning, the call to prayer echoed from the palace speakers. Servants went from room to room reminding us to prepare for prayer, wash, and stand at the correct time. As children, we followed everything without question. My father believed deeply in Wahhabi teachings, and he insisted that every prince and princess in our household must appear disciplined, respectful, and perfectly trained in Islamic manners. Even though we were surrounded by wealth, our lives felt controlled, monitored, and shaped by responsibility. People outside imagined freedom, but inside the palace walls, we lived under constant watch. The only person who truly understood me was my stepsister, Hannah. She was 2 years older, born from my father's first wife. Even though we did not share the same mother, she loved me like a full brother. From childhood, she was the one who ran to my side whenever my heart condition worsened. She held me when I fainted, called the doctors, and prayed beside me when the pain became unbearable. My father respected her intelligence, and my mother admired her kindness. She was the only person who could make me laugh during the difficult hospital nights and the long medical tests that often left me scared. Growing up in the palace was easier because Hannah was always by my side. She made life feel normal even when my health was falling apart. People believe palace life is full of joy, but it is full of rules. We couldn't attend regular schools, visit malls without permission, or play outside the palace walls. Guards followed us everywhere, even during simple walks in the garden. The palace in Riyadh was beautiful, filled with gold decorations, marble floors, chandeliers imported from Europe, and fountains that glowed at night. But for us, it was like a golden cage. Everything happened inside: lessons, meals, playtime, and even exercise. We had tutors from Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon who came daily to teach us mathematics, Arabic literature, Islamic history, and English. Despite all the luxury, I felt trapped. I never experienced life the way ordinary young people did. My world was controlled by protocol, expectations, and fear of dishonoring the family name. By the time I turned 16, my health became more unpredictable. The doctors from King Faisal Specialist Hospital suggested surgeries and treatments, but nothing offered a real cure. Some recommended taking me abroad to Germany or the United States for more advanced medical procedures, but my father always refused. He didn't want the media or political rivals to know anything about my condition. Because of that decision, I learned to live with constant pain. Fainting became normal for me. Sudden weakness became part of my daily routine. I used to lie awake at night, unsure if I would live long enough to see adulthood. The fear was always there, even when I tried to hide it. Meanwhile, Hannah was growing into a brilliant young woman. She excelled in her studies, spoke English fluently, and understood diplomacy better than most adults. When she finished secondary school, my father decided she needed to continue her education abroad. She was accepted into a university in Geneva, Switzerland, to study international relations. I still remember the day she left. The palace felt painfully silent afterward. Without her, I felt more alone than ever. She had been the one who comforted me during medical emergencies, the one who made my days feel less heavy. After she left, the emptiness inside me grew. My health also worsened because stress triggers my condition. I collapsed several times during prayer sessions, and the doctors increased my medication again. During Hannah's 4 years abroad, we communicated mainly through calls. At first, we spoke every weekend, but over time, her studies and schedule became demanding, and the calls became less frequent. Still, she always asked about my health and encouraged me to stay strong. Life in the palace continued slowly and heavily. I followed the same routine every day: Quran lessons with the Imam, private tutoring, medical checkups, and meetings with relatives who were more interested in my outward behavior than my inner struggles. I always felt like I was performing a role instead of living a real life. Spending too much time with myself allowed fear to grow inside me: fear of dying young, fear of suffering, fear of disappointing the family if my illness became public. And politics also made life more tense. My father had responsibilities that kept him busy and emotionally distant. His focus was always on managing relationships with other royal relatives, government ministries, and tribal leaders. There was never real time for emotional connection. In royal culture, affection is not openly shown. Pain is hidden. Fear is suppressed. As a result, I learned to suffer quietly without complaining. Even when my chest burned like fire, I forced myself to walk straight, breathe normally, and pretend everything was fine. Only Hannah knew how broken I really felt. Everything changed the moment she returned to Riyadh. It was early morning when her car entered the palace courtyard. I had been waiting near the entrance because the excitement of seeing her again kept me awake all night. When she stepped out of the vehicle, I felt overwhelming joy. But within the first few seconds, I noticed something else. She looked different. Her smile was warm, but her eyes carried a calmness I couldn't explain. She hugged me tightly, and the moment she pulled away, I realized she was not the same girl who left 4 years ago. Something in her had shifted. At first, I thought her change was simply because she had lived in Europe for too long. Many Saudis who study abroad come back with different habits, new ways of dressing, speaking, or thinking. But Hannah's change had nothing to do with style or culture. It was deeper. It sat quietly behind her smile, like a secret she wasn't ready to share. She still showed respect to my father, still followed palace rules, and still participated in family events. But she no longer rushed to read the Quran as she used to. She didn't show the same interest in the religious discussions that once excited her. During prayer time, she moved quietly, almost thoughtfully, without the intense seriousness she once had. For a while, I simply watched her. I didn't want to confront her or ask questions. I was just happy she was home. But I couldn't ignore the fact that something inside her heart had changed. When she sat alone in the courtyard at night, she looked peaceful in a way I had never seen before. She stared at the sky like someone thinking deeply about life. When relatives talked about Islamic traditions, she listened politely, but her reactions were softer, almost distant. She was present, but something inside her seemed to be standing apart. One evening, while walking through the hallway, I heard her speaking to one of the housemaids from the Philippines. They weren't discussing anything dramatic, just simple things about life abroad, but Hannah's tone was gentle, calm, and full of kindness. It felt different from the controlled tone royal family members are trained to use. The maid seemed comfortable around her, almost grateful, which is unusual in palace culture where staff are often afraid of speaking freely. I walked away before they noticed me, but I knew this was another sign that Hannah had returned with a new perspective on life. Her presence brought life back into the palace for me. Even though I couldn't identify the exact reason, her personality seemed transformed. She spent more time with me than before, helping me walk during my weekdays, talking to me about her experiences abroad, and listening to me whenever I felt scared about my health. There were nights when I woke up from chest pain and shortness of breath, and she was already by my side, holding my hand and calling the doctors. Her return made the palace feel alive again, even if I didn't yet understand what she had gone through during her years in Europe. What I didn't know then was that the change in Hannah would soon pull me into a journey that would alter the entire direction of my life. But at this point, all I understood was that the sister I loved deeply had returned with a new expression in her eyes. Something calm, quiet, and mysterious. I didn't know the meaning of it yet. I only knew that something inside her spirit had changed during her time in Geneva, and that this change was going to affect me in ways I could never have imagined. From the moment Hannah came back from Geneva, something about her spirit felt different, but I did not understand it fully until the following weeks. She spoke gently, moved calmly, and carried a type of peace I had never seen in the palace before. She listened more, smiled differently, and looked at people with a softness that didn't match the strictness of our home. At first, no one else seemed to notice. The adults were too busy discussing politics, inheritance matters, family alliances, and royal protocols. The younger cousins were absorbed in entertainment, fashion, or social media, but because Hannah and I had always been close, I sensed every small change in her behavior. She seemed to be hiding a truth she wasn't ready to share yet, and although I didn't want to push her, curiosity quietly grew inside me. Her schedule changed as well. Before she traveled, Hannah used to attend Quran recitation sessions with dedication. She followed the Imam's instructions carefully, memorized long passages, and showed interest in Islamic studies. After returning, her commitment reduced. She didn't miss prayers completely, but she no longer rushed to perform them. If the family gathered for religious discussions, she remained respectful, but didn't participate as deeply as before. She avoided long debates about Islamic rulings or hadith interpretations. Instead, she asked questions about kindness, forgiveness, and compassion. Topics most family members considered too emotional or unnecessary. I watched her quietly and wondered what had shaped this new mindset. Hannah also spent more time alone. She would sit in the palace garden during the cooler evenings, staring at the palm trees or the night sky. Sometimes she wrote in a small notebook she never allowed anyone to touch. Other times she closed her eyes gently, as if silently thinking about something important. When servants passed by, she greeted them with unusual warmth that made them smile nervously. A few maids whispered that she had changed, but none dared to ask her why. In our culture, personal questions are considered disrespectful when directed at members of the royal family. Still, the quiet transformation in Hannah's personality attracted attention, even if people pretended not to notice. Despite all these changes, she showed more concern for me than ever before. My heart condition had worsened over the years, and she knew every sign of my weakness. If my breathing changed, she noticed. If my steps slowed, she held my arm without waiting for permission. If my mood became heavy, she asked me questions until I felt lighter. Her care felt deeper, more emotional, almost as if she was preparing herself for something. I did not want to frighten her, but I knew my condition was becoming more dangerous. My attacks were more frequent, and sometimes I felt pressure in my chest even when resting. The doctors at the palace clinic grew more serious each month. Their updates were covered in polite language, but the meaning behind their eyes was clear. I was running out of time. One evening, I had a small episode while walking through the main hallway. It wasn't a full attack, but a sudden tightness in my chest made me stop abruptly. Hannah rushed to my side, placed her hand gently over my back, and helped me sit on a nearby chair. Her expression was filled with concern, but also something else: fear. "Talal, how often has this happened recently?" she asked quietly. I didn't want to worry her, so I tried to downplay it. "It's nothing serious, just a moment of weakness." But she didn't believe me. She held my hand, her eyes searching my face with a look only an older sister could give. That night I sensed that whatever had changed inside her was connected to her concern for me. A deeper truth was sitting in her heart, waiting for the right moment to come out. The moment arrived unexpectedly. It was a late afternoon, and I decided to walk outside near the courtyard after Asr prayer. The sun hung low over the palace walls, and the air was warm but not too heavy. I had only taken a few steps when a sharp pain shot through my chest. My vision blurred instantly. I tried to take a breath but couldn't. My legs weakened under me, and everything around me swayed. Before I could call for help, I collapsed onto the tiles. I heard someone call my name loudly. It was Hannah. The next few seconds felt like a storm. She ran toward me, her voice breaking as she shouted for the guards and nurses. She lifted my head onto her lap, her hands shaking as she tried to keep me conscious. The pain was so strong, I felt as though my heart was being squeezed by an unseen force. I could hear distant footsteps, voices, panic, but none of it mattered. I thought I was dying. My hearing faded in and out, but I could still hear Hannah crying. She touched my face gently, whispering my name over and over. Her tears fell on my cheeks, and for a moment I wished the pain would stop, not because I feared death, but because I hated seeing her suffer. When the doctors arrived, everything felt distant and slow. They carried me to the clinic room while Hannah followed closely, refusing to leave my side. She didn't speak until the attack ended and I stabilized. Only then did she sit beside me, her eyes swollen from crying, her clothes slightly wet from tears. She watched me with a mixture of relief and fear that cut deeper than the pain itself. Hours later, after the doctors left and the palace returned to its normal silence, Hannah came to my room again. She closed the door gently behind her and sat near me on the edge of my bed. For a few minutes she didn't speak. She simply looked at me as if searching for courage. Finally she whispered, "Talal, I can't keep this secret anymore. Not after what happened today." I felt confused. "What a secret?" She hesitated and I saw her hands tremble slightly. Hannah had always been strong, always confident. Seeing her afraid made my heart beat faster. She looked down, swallowed hard, and then lifted her eyes to mine. "Something happened in Geneva," she said softly. "Something that changed my life completely." I felt a wave of curiosity mixed with concern. Her tone didn't sound like someone sharing a simple story. It sounded like someone revealing a truth that could change everything. Still, I stayed quiet, waiting for her to continue. She took a long breath and said, "Talal, I met people who taught me things I had never heard before. They spoke about love, about hope, about forgiveness in a way I had never experienced in Islam." Her voice lowered almost to a whisper. "They spoke to me about Jesus." The room became silent instantly. My heart didn't skip from illness that time. It was shock. Hearing that name from the lips of a Saudi princess inside a royal palace in Riyadh felt impossible. It was one of the most dangerous words a Muslim could speak in our country. I stared at her in disbelief. "What are you saying, Hannah?" She looked directly into my eyes with a calmness that didn't match the fear in her voice. "I'm telling you the truth. I met Christians in Geneva. They taught me things I had never understood before. And Talal, I believe. I became a follower of Jesus." My breath caught in my throat. Apostasy in Saudi Arabia was not a small issue. It was a crime, a deadly one. I felt my hands go cold. My first reaction was fear for her safety. My second reaction was confusion. The Hannah I knew had been a dedicated Muslim, committed to learning Quran and following Islamic guidelines carefully. This new revelation felt impossible, yet her expression was full of sincerity. She continued speaking gently, as if trying not to overwhelm me. "I didn't plan this. It happened slowly. I listened to people talk about a kind of love I had never experienced before. I saw a kindness in them that touched my heart. I felt something open inside me, something I had never felt growing up here. I wanted to interrupt her, to question her, to tell her how dangerous her words were. But something in her tone held me still. She was not confused. She was not emotional. She was certain. And that certainty frightened me more than my illness ever did. Then Hannah said something that shook me deeper than the confession itself. She leaned closer and said softly, "Talal, I believe you will be healed. I believe Jesus can do what no doctor has been able to do for you." My heart pounded in my chest, but not from weakness. Her words felt impossible. All my life, the only explanation for healing we heard was Allah's will or medical treatment. Hearing her speak with absolute confidence about something she believed could cure me felt unreal. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. Fear, shock, and confusion filled my mind at the same time. That night, after she left my room, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word she said. Jesus, healing, faith, new life. These were ideas I had never allowed into my thoughts before. In Saudi Arabia, especially in royal families, Christianity is treated like a forbidden subject. Even discussing it can cause suspicion, Yet Hannah had spoken with a confidence that made me wonder if she knew something I didn't. I remembered how peaceful she looked when she returned from Geneva. I remembered how her eyes carried something gentle and different. I remembered how she held me during my attack as if she believed something greater than medicine was at work. I didn't understand anything yet, but the seed of curiosity planted earlier began to grow faster. The house was silent, the servants were asleep, the guards were outside doing their nightly rotations, and I was lying alone in my room, torn between fear and curiosity. I tried to pray the way I had been taught since childhood, but the words felt heavy. My mind kept going back to Hannah's calm face, her quiet voice, her belief that I could be healed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just afraid of my illness, I was afraid of what her revelation meant for both of us. As the night grew deeper and the palace lights dimmed, I realized something quietly terrifying. Whatever Hannah experienced in Europe had changed her completely, and whether I liked it or not, her truth had now pulled me into a journey I never saw coming. I closed my eyes and tried to calm my breathing, but sleep refused to come. All I felt was an unexplainable trembling inside me, as if my entire world was shifting. And that was how chapter 2 of my life truly began, not with understanding, but with confusion, fear, and questions I couldn't answer. The hours after Hannah revealed her secret felt like a storm inside my mind. When I woke the next morning, nothing felt normal anymore. Every sound in the palace seemed louder, every step heavier, and every glance from the guards felt suspicious, even though they had no idea what Hannah had told me. I tried to act naturally, but I couldn't stop thinking about her words. She believed in something forbidden. She believed in something dangerous. But the biggest shock was that she believed someone I had been warned about all my life could heal me. It felt impossible. Yet her voice still echoed in my mind with calm certainty. That day my chest felt strange, not painful, but tight with emotions I didn't understand. I avoided everyone, including my father, because I wasn't sure what might come out of my mouth if someone questioned me. My condition continued getting worse in the days that followed. One morning, I woke up feeling unusually weak. I stood to perform my usual routine, but the moment I tried to walk, my legs trembled. I sat back down, breathing heavily, afraid that another attack might come. For the first time, I noticed that fear was taking control of me. I had always tried to stay strong, to ignore the danger inside my body, but now my courage was disappearing. I began to realize that I might not have many years ahead of me. I was too young to accept death, but too sick to pretend everything was normal. That afternoon, while lying in my room trying to regain strength, Hannah came in quietly. She sat on the chair beside my bed, looked at me gently, and asked, "Talal, how long has this been happening?" Her voice sounded worried, but not surprised. When I told her the truth, she held my hand with a seriousness that made my eyes sting. She waited until evening before she spoke again. After dinner, when the palace grew silent and the staff went to their quarters, she knocked softly on my room door. "Can I come in?" she asked in a whisper. When she entered, she looked around carefully before sitting beside me. She held something under her abaya, hidden like a precious treasure. My heart beat faster, partly from fear and partly from curiosity. She took a deep breath, looked into my eyes, and revealed a small book. It wasn't a Quran. It wasn't anything I had seen growing up. It was a small Bible, thin, worn, and simple. My breath caught in my throat. Holding such a book inside a Saudi royal palace was enough to destroy our lives. I stared at it as if it were a burning object. But Hannah held it with gentle confidence. "This is the book that changed my life," she said softly. My hands trembled when she placed it on the bed between us. The weight of it felt heavier than the gold-plated Qur'ans we grew up reading. I didn't know how to react. Fear battled with curiosity inside me like two storms crashing. She opened it slowly, turning the pages with such reverence that it almost felt like watching someone handle a newborn child. She showed me verses she had highlighted, words she said had given her peace during difficult moments abroad. I didn't understand any of it at first. The language was simple, yet the meaning felt deep. When she read softly, her voice became calm and steady. I listened, not because I believed, but because her tone carried something I couldn't explain. I knew I was doing something dangerous, something forbidden, but I couldn't stop listening. That night became the start of our secret routine. Once everyone was asleep, Hannah would come to my room quietly. She made sure no guard was walking nearby, no servants were awake, and the hallway was empty. She always hid the Bible under her abaya until she closed my door. Then she would sit beside me and read softly. At first, I only listened. The verses she chose spoke about love, patience, mercy, strength, and healing. I had heard many Islamic teachings growing up, but these words carried a warmth that felt new to me. They didn't sound like commands, they didn't sound like threats, they sounded like hope. Something inside me softened, even if I didn't understand why. My questions grew with each passing night. Why do these words make you different? Why do they calm your heart? Why do they sound gentle? Hannah answered every question with patience. She explained how she had met people in Geneva who treated her with kindness, how they introduced her to new ideas about forgiveness and personal connection with God, and how she eventually found peace she never felt before. She never pressured me to believe anything. She only shared what she experienced, yet her quiet conviction stirred something inside me. For the first time, I felt like someone was offering me hope beyond what I had known since childhood. As the weeks passed, my health fluctuated. Some days were manageable, but others were frightening. One night, I woke gasping for air, clutching my chest as pain spread sharply through my ribs. Hannah rushed to me immediately, holding my shoulders and whispering comforting words. My body shook uncontrollably, and for a moment I thought my heart would stop completely. When the attack ended, I lay there weak and trembling. Hannah looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Talal," she whispered shakily, "I can't stand watching you suffer. I know someone who can save you, but you must be willing to open your heart." I didn't understand what she meant fully, but the desperation in her voice shook me more than the attack did. I had lost all strength to argue. All I had left was fear. Later that night, when the pain eased, Hannah opened the Bible again. She read verses about healing, hope, and restoration. I didn't know if I believed any of it, but the words felt strangely comforting. When she finished reading, she closed the Bible, placed it on her lap, and looked directly at me. "Talal," she said softly, "I believe Jesus can heal you. I believe it with all my heart." Her conviction was so strong it startled me. "You have tried everything else," she continued. "Doctors, medicine, treatments, prayers, nothing has worked, but what if there is something beyond what we know?" I stared at her silently. The truth was, I had nothing left. No medical hope, no strength, no future. I was tired of living in fear, tired of waiting for death. Her words stirred something inside me that felt like a flicker of possibility. Later that same night, after Hannah left my room, I lay awake thinking about her words. The palace was silent, but my mind was loud. I stared at the dark ceiling and felt tears slip down my face. I wasn't crying from pain this time. I was crying from hopelessness. I whispered into the darkness, I don't know what to do anymore. For the first time in my life, the Islamic prayers I had memorized since childhood did not come naturally. My mind didn't go to the verses I had been taught. Instead, I remembered the soft verses Hannah had read earlier. Words about comfort, peace, and healing. Something inside me broke, not physically but emotionally. I felt like I had been carrying years of fear and pain without ever letting go. That was the moment I did something I never expected. I whispered words into the darkness, not to Allah, not in Arabic, not in a memorized form. They were simple, desperate, shaky words. If you are real, I whispered softly, help me. It wasn't a formal prayer. It wasn't planned. It simply came out of me. I wasn't fully aware of what I was doing. I didn't know who I was speaking to, but the moment I whispered it, something inside me felt lighter. I didn't understand why. I didn't know what it meant, but I felt a strange calm settle over my chest. I hadn't felt such calm in years. Over the next few days, something strange began to happen. My attacks became less frequent. The sharp pains in my chest reduced. The constant heaviness I was used to living with began to fade. I didn't understand it. Even the palace doctor seemed confused. During a routine examination, he looked at me with mild surprise when the results showed improvement. This is unexpected, he said softly as he reviewed the charts. Your heart rhythm looks more stable than before. I didn't tell him anything about my secret nights with Hannah. I only nodded quietly, pretending not to know why he looked puzzled. Hannah noticed the changes even before the doctors did. She could see it in the way I walked, in my breathing, in the tone of my voice. One night, after she finished reading from the Bible, she looked at me with a smile that reached her eyes. You're getting stronger, she said softly. I didn't deny it. I felt stronger. I felt different, but I still refused to say aloud that something was happening. I wasn't ready to accept it. I wasn't ready to admit that the one thing forbidden in our world might be the only thing saving me. A few weeks later, the doctor suggested running a full test. He recommended an advanced scan at one of the private hospitals in Riyadh, away from public attention. My father approved it, wanting clarity without drawing outside interest. I went with 2 guards and a private nurse. The test took several hours. When the results finally came in, the doctor reviewing them stared at the screen with wide eyes. He called in another specialist, then another. They whispered among themselves, shocked. When they returned, the head cardiologist said something I never expected to hear. Your heart is showing complete recovery, he said slowly. I don't know how this is possible, but the condition you've had since birth is no longer visible. I felt dizzy, but not from sickness, this time from disbelief. The guards congratulated me, praising Allah for the miracle. The nurses thanked Allah. The doctor smiled and said, this is a blessing from God. You must show gratitude. Everyone around me celebrated, but inside me, a quiet truth echoed. I knew what had changed. I knew why my heart was beating normally. I knew the healing didn't come through medicine or luck. When I returned to the palace, Hannah was waiting in the hallway. She looked at my face for 1 second and already knew. Tears filled her eyes instantly. "Talal," she whispered. I nodded slowly, unable to speak. That night, we sat together in silence. She didn't need to say anything. Neither did I. Both of us knew something extraordinary had happened. Something beyond medicine. Something beyond explanation. We kept it inside our hearts, hidden from the world that would never accept it. As the palace slept, the two of us sat quietly, holding on to the truth no one else could understand. Something miraculous had begun, and it was only the beginning. The weeks that followed my healing felt like stepping into a new world. I woke up each morning waiting to feel the familiar heaviness in my chest, but it never came back. Every breath felt light, every step steady. I moved through the palace like someone experiencing life for the first time, but the greatest change was not in my body, it was in my heart. The peace I felt at night during our secret Bible sessions stayed with me throughout the day. I no longer lived in constant fear. Instead, I lived with the strange new courage that frightened me because it was unfamiliar. Hannah felt it too. She became even calmer, even more gentle, even more certain about her faith. We did not talk loudly about what happened. We never said the full truth inside open rooms. But in our quiet moments, we understood each other perfectly without needing many words. Our secret nights became the most important part of our lives. Once the palace grew silent and the guards settled into their routines, Hannah would come into my room carefully. She always checked the hallway first, making sure no one was passing through. She kept the Bible hidden inside the inner layer of her abaya, and when she closed the door, she exhaled like someone carrying a weight all day, finally allowed to rest. We sat on the rug next to my bed, and she opened the thin pages with respect. She read slowly, making sure I understood each verse. The words spoke about courage, forgiveness, truth, sacrifice, and love in a way I had never heard before. I had grown up hearing rules, warnings, and obligations. These verses felt different. They reached my heart instead of just my ears. Sometimes we spent hours reading and whispering our thoughts until the early hours of dawn. As I grew stronger physically, I began asking deeper questions spiritually. I wanted to understand everything. I wanted to know why the words in that small book gave me peace when nothing else in my life ever did. I asked Hannah to explain passages, meanings, and stories. She told me everything she learned in Geneva, how she struggled at first, how she feared disappointing our family, how she discovered a new kind of relationship with God that did not depend on fear or punishment. The more she explained, the more I felt my heart open to truths I had never allowed myself to consider. I no longer felt like a prisoner inside my own life. For the first time, I felt alive. We prayed silently, whispering softly so no one could hear. They were not memorized prayers. They were honest conversations with God in simple words. And every time I felt a presence so real it made my heart warm. But peace in a place like our palace never lasts long. One evening, after reading for hours, we became careless. We did not hear footsteps in the hallway. We did not notice a shadow pass near the door. Hannah had left the Bible on the edge of the bed instead of hiding it. We were too relaxed, too used to the silence, too confident that no one would come at that hour. Then, without warning, the door swung open. Standing there was our older brother, Faisal. the son of my father's first wife. He was known for his strictness, his devotion to Wahhabi Islam, and his close relationship with certain religious authorities in Riyadh. The moment his eyes landed on the open Bible, his expression twisted into shock and fury. "What is this?" he demanded, stepping inside before we could react. My heart dropped. Hannah froze. The room suddenly felt too small, too bright, too dangerous. Faisal grabbed the Bible from the bed with shaking hands, holding it between his fingers as if he were touching something filthy. "Are you insane?" he shouted. "Do you know what this is? Do you know what this means?" His voice echoed through the hallway, and within seconds, 2 guards rushed toward the room. Hannah and I stood still, unable to speak. My mind raced, but my body refused to move. Faisal's face grew red with anger. "How long has this been happening? Who brought this into our home? Who taught you this filth?" His words stabbed my heart, not because of their harshness, but because I realized we were no longer safe. Everything we had kept hidden was suddenly exposed. The guards looked confused and nervous. They had no idea how to react to a situation involving members of the royal family. Faisal ordered them to follow him as he stormed out of the room with the Bible clenched tightly in his hand. Within minutes, the palace turned into chaos. Servants whispered nervously, guards walked in tight formations, doors slammed. Lights were turned on in rooms that were usually dark at night. Hannah and I were separated immediately. 2 guards escorted her to another part of the palace, while 2 more forced me to walk toward a secured section where interrogations usually occurred. The air felt suffocating as we moved through the corridor. Fear wrapped itself around my chest. Not because of my illness, my heart was strong now, but because I knew the truth. Possessing a Bible, reading it, and believing in it was considered apostasy under Islamic law. For ordinary Saudis, the punishment was severe. For members of the royal family, it could be worse, hidden behind closed doors, never revealed to the public. They placed me in a room with white walls, a metal table, and 2 chairs. It was a cold, empty space used for serious discussions. The door closed behind me with a heavy click, and I sat alone with my hands trembling slightly. After several minutes, my father entered the room, followed by 2 senior relatives and a religious authority from the family's trusted circle. My father's face was unreadable. He did not shout, but the silence in his eyes was louder than any scream. He sat across from me and placed the Bible Faisal had found on the table. The Imam beside him looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and shock. My father took a deep breath and said, "Talal, explain yourself." His voice was low, controlled, but filled with restrained rage. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry. I had never been confronted like this before. I had never seen my father so hurt and furious at the same time. Even when political issues arose or family disputes escalated, he never carried this level of intensity in his eyes. "This is forbidden," he continued. "This is not a mistake. This is betrayal. Do you understand what this book represents in our country, in our family, in Islam?" His voice sharpened with every question. The Imam leaned forward, reciting verses about apostasy and the seriousness of abandoning faith. Everything inside me screamed to defend Hannah, to protect her, to take responsibility. But fear locked my tongue. My father asked again, more forcefully, "Who brought this into our home?" When I did not answer immediately, he slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. "Tell me the truth." Before I could respond, the door opened again and Hannah was brought into the room by 2 guards. Her wrists were shaking, but her face remained calm. My father turned toward her with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Is this your doing?" he asked sharply. Hannah did not look away. She did not deny it. She simply nodded with quiet courage. "Yes," she said softly, "I brought it." A heavy silence filled the room. The Imam gasped. The relatives stared in shock. My father stood up slowly, his expression turning cold and distant. "Do you understand what you are confessing?" he asked her. Hannah nodded again. "I do." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, not from illness, but from fear for her. She was risking everything, everything she had, everything we had. The interrogation that followed felt endless. They questioned us separately and together. They demanded explanations. They asked how long we had been reading the Bible, whether we had spoken to anyone outside the palace, whether someone had influenced us, whether we understood the seriousness of our actions as Muslims. Every question carried a threat inside it. Every silence felt like a trap. Hannah answered calmly but firmly, never disrespecting anyone, but never lying either. I struggled to speak because the pressure was overwhelming. The Imam quoted Islamic laws on apostasy, explaining that those who leave Islam commit one of the greatest sins. The relatives whispered among themselves, clearly worried about the shame this could bring to the family if it became public. My father paced the room, rubbing his forehead as if trying to decide between punishment and protection. Finally, after hours of questioning, the religious authority spoke with a stern tone. "You both have violated Islamic law. You have turned your hearts away from Allah. You have brought shame to this honorable family." His voice grew colder. "The law is clear. Apostasy cannot be tolerated." My stomach tightened. My breathing sharpened. I knew what he meant. My father looked at me and at Hannah, his jaw clenched in anger. For a moment, it looked like he was going to explode, but instead, he turned to the relatives and the Imam and said a few words in a low voice. They stepped aside and whispered together for several minutes. When they returned, the Imam announced the decision that would change the course of our lives. "You will both be confined," he said firmly, "and you will face corrective punishment for your disobedience. And because your actions threaten the honor of this family, the Royal Council has agreed that you shall be joined in marriage. Forced marriage will serve as discipline and will erase suspicion in the eyes of the world." My mind went blank. Marriage to Hannah, my sister, my closest friend, something forbidden in Islam, something unthinkable, something designed to break us emotionally. The Imam continued calmly, as if describing a normal procedure. "If you renounce this belief you have followed, this marriage will not be necessary. But if you refuse," he paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, "then your punishment shall proceed." My father stepped forward, looking directly into my eyes. "Talal," he said in a deep voice, "this is your last chance. Renounce this foreign belief now. Return to Islam fully. Do not destroy your life." I looked at Hannah. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her face held steady courage. For the first time in my life, I felt stronger than fear. "I cannot lie," Hannah said quietly. "I will not deny what I believe." My father's face hardened. He turned to me. "And you?" I swallowed, trembling, but the truth was already carved inside me. I could not deny the one who healed my heart and gave me peace. "I can't," I whispered. "I can't deny the truth." The room erupted into anger and disappointment. The decision was final. They separated us immediately. Guards dragged me through the corridor to one of the remote rooms used for punishment and confinement. The walk felt endless. The palace, once familiar, now felt like a trap closing around me. But one thought echoed stronger than any fear. I was not alone. Hannah was somewhere in another room, facing the same fate. And the one who healed my heart was still watching over us. I did not know what would happen next. I only knew that the punishment was set, the forced marriage planned, and the storm ahead would be unlike anything we had faced before. The moment I was dragged into the confinement room, the reality of our situation settled on my chest like a heavy stone. The room was small, cold, and without any windows. Only a dim yellow bulb flickered above me, casting shadows on the bare walls. I sat on the thin mattress placed on the floor and tried to calm my breathing. Everything that had just happened felt unreal. One day earlier, Hannah and I were reading the Bible quietly in my room. Now we were prisoners, treated like criminals for believing something different. I heard muffled voices and footsteps outside the door, guards discussing the orders they had been given. Their tones carried nervousness. Even they understood the seriousness of what was happening. Apostasy was not just a personal matter, it was a storm that could shake a family's pride. I wrapped my arms around my chest and prayed silently for strength. For 2 days they kept me in that room with limited contact. The guards brought meals but never spoke more than necessary. Every few hours, someone came in to question me again. An imam, a senior family member, or an advisor, all trying to persuade me to renounce what they called foreign influence. They spoke of duty, honor, loyalty to Islam, loyalty to our family, loyalty to the traditions of our ancestors. They reminded me of the shame this scandal would bring if it ever leaked. But the more they spoke, the less their words affected me. I no longer felt fear in the same way. Something inside me had changed since my healing. My heart was strong, my mind clear. The peace I felt in those secret nights with Hannah gave me strength I could not explain. I listened respectfully, but I refused to say the words they wanted to hear. They tried different strategies. First came the gentle approach, encouragement, logical arguments, promises that everything could go back to normal if I simply denied what they accused me of believing. When that failed, they used pressure. They reminded me of my father's authority, the laws of the kingdom, the expectations placed upon every royal child. When that still did not work, they turned harsh. They warned me about the punishment for apostasy. They hinted at consequences beyond imprisonment. They described scenarios meant to terrify me into submission, but no matter how loud their voices grew, my heart remained firm. I could not deny the truth that had changed my life. I could not lie to save myself. And I certainly could not abandon Hannah, who had already shown more courage than anyone in our entire family. On the third day, they brought me out of the room and walked me through a private corridor. The palace felt different, tense, cold, heavily guarded. They led me to a small hall where my father, a few uncles, and the imam were gathered. Hannah was brought in moments later, escorted by female guards. When our eyes met, everything inside me softened. She looked tired but calm. Her wrists bore marks from tight restraints, but her gaze held the same quiet courage I admired. The imam began to speak, reviewing our case and explaining the decision that had been made. "You have refused every opportunity to repent," he said. "You have rejected the chance to return to the faith of your family. You have refused to obey the authority of your father." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on everyone present. "Therefore, the family council has decided. You will be married." The words struck me like a blow. My stomach twisted violently. I looked toward Hannah, and she looked back with a mix of strength and sorrow. The Imam continued explaining, speaking about discipline and family honor and eliminating suspicion. He said the marriage would be private, attended only by family and trusted clerics. It would take place in the palace's ceremonial hall. We would be locked together as a symbolic punishment. They believed forcing us into such a shameful situation would break our will. They believed we would eventually renounce everything in desperation. They had no idea that doing so only strengthened our resolve. Hannah lifted her chin slightly and closed her eyes for a brief moment, and in that silent gesture, I felt reassurance, as if she was silently telling me not to be afraid. They returned us to confinement, but this time in separate rooms close to each other. Through the thick walls, I could sometimes hear faint movements, perhaps Hannah pacing, perhaps guards shifting positions. The day before the ceremony, a team of palace staff entered my room with formal attire. They laid out a cream-colored thobe, a gold-trimmed bisht, and white sandals meant for ceremonial occasions. The irony of the situation stung me. A forced marriage dressed in royal garments. They instructed me to shave, groom myself, and prepare. I refused at first, but when the guard threatened physical force, I complied silently. There was no point in resisting outwardly. My resistance was inside, where no one could reach. The morning of the ceremony arrived with unusual silence. The palace felt heavy, as if every wall carried a secret. The guards escorted me through a private hallway leading to the ceremonial hall. As I walked, the weight of what was happening pressed harder on my shoulders. I had attended countless royal weddings in that same hall, cousins, uncles, distant relatives, every ceremony filled with joy, music, and celebration. Today the hall was stripped of beauty. There were no flowers, no lights, no decorations, only a long carpet, a few rows of chairs, and stern-faced family members. The mood felt like a funeral rather than a wedding. I saw Hannah at the far end of the room, surrounded by female relatives. She wore a simple white dress, but her face looked pale from stress and exhaustion. Yet she stood with dignity, refusing to show fear. When the clerics entered, everyone rose. Their presence intensified the tension in the room. They stood at the front, holding documents and religious texts. One of them cleared his throat, preparing to begin the ceremony. The Imam stepped forward first. "This union," he said stiffly, "is a necessary step to correct behavior and restore honor." His voice echoed cold and formal. No one smiled, no one congratulated, no one celebrated. The relatives avoided eye contact with each other, as if ashamed of participating in something so unnatural. Hannah glanced at me briefly, and in her eyes I saw the same unspoken message we had shared since childhood. Whatever happens, we face it together. As the ceremony began, the clerics recited verses in a deep, steady tone. The words were familiar to me, but in this context, they felt distorted and out of place. The Imam turned to me first, asking if I accepted the marriage. My throat tightened. I glanced again at Hannah. She was trembling slightly, but her eyes held steady courage. Before I could answer, something strange happened. A distant rumble echoed through the hall. It sounded like thunder, but the sky outside had been clear just minutes earlier. The clerics paused, looking confused. The Imam frowned and continued his recitation. Then it happened again, louder this time. The ground vibrated faintly beneath our feet. Some relatives shifted nervously. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. One of the clerics stepped toward the window to look outside. Suddenly the sound intensified. A deafening roar swept through the palace grounds. Before anyone could react, the windows shook violently. The sky darkened unnaturally quickly, as if a storm was rolling in from nowhere. A guard rushed in from the entrance, shouting words that sent the whole into immediate panic. "A flood! Water is coming from the north side. Fast!" The room erupted. Relatives stood up in confusion and fear. Clerics clutched their robes. Guards ran toward the doors. Another guard shouted, "The barriers have broken. The water is entering the courtyard." The hall filled with noise and chaos. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a crash of thunder that shook the room. It was as if the entire atmosphere had turned violent within minutes. Within seconds, water began pouring under the doors. First a thin stream, then a rush. Women screamed, children cried. The clerics tried to maintain order, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of the incoming flood. The guards attempted to direct people towards safer exits, but the water moved too quickly. Chairs toppled. Carpets floated, decoration pieces crashed to the ground. I saw Hannah across the hall, surrounded by panicking relatives. Without thinking, I pushed through the rushing water, my clothes becoming soaked instantly. The water level rose faster than I could comprehend. Guards shouted instructions, trying to lead everyone toward higher ground. When I reached Hannah, she grabbed my hand instantly, her grip strong and desperate. Our eyes locked, and we both understood the same thing. This was our chance. The guards were too distracted, relatives too terrified, clerics too confused to notice us slipping away. The flood had thrown the palace into complete disorganization. We moved toward a side exit that led to one of the less guarded gardens. The water pushed against our legs, making it difficult to walk, but adrenaline gave us strength. Doors slammed from the force of the water. Electricity flickered, threatening to go out. I heard the sound of glass shattering somewhere behind us. The entire palace had become a chaotic maze. We reached the side corridor just as another wave of water crashed through the main entrance behind us. Hannah gripped my hand tighter. We pushed forward, our feet slipping on the wet marble floor. The corridor led to a small outdoor passage that connected to the older part of the palace. Because it was rarely used, it wasn't heavily guarded. As we ran, the rain outside intensified, falling in sheets that blurred our vision. The flash flood was unlike anything I had ever seen in Riyadh. The dry land, unused to such sudden downpours, couldn't absorb the water fast enough, turning everything into a flowing river. We moved quickly, using the confusion around us as cover. Guards shouted orders behind us, but none were directed at us. No one had noticed our escape yet. The water in the courtyard reached our knees as we crossed it, struggling against the force of the current. I held Hannah's arm tightly, pulling her with me as we moved toward the back gate. Lightning illuminated the palace walls, revealing guards running in different directions, trying to save equipment, cars, and people. We used the darkness between the flashes to hide our movements. Every second mattered. If anyone realized we were missing, the search would begin immediately. We reached the outer gate, a smaller, rarely used exit meant for maintenance staff. The water had weakened the metal lock, and with a strong push it gave way slightly. I forced it open just enough for us to slip through. Once outside the palace walls, the roar of the flood was still loud, but the area was darker and less chaotic. We ran through the narrow back streets behind the palace complex, our clothes soaked and our hearts pounding. I didn't know where we were going. I didn't know how far we needed to run. I only knew we had to get away from the palace before someone realized the truth. Hannah stumbled once and I pulled her up quickly. Her breathing was heavy, but her eyes were filled with determination. We moved deeper into the empty night, using shadows to hide our presence. The storm raged behind us, swallowing the palace in darkness and chaos. Every step we took was a step away from prison, from forced marriage, from punishment. Every step was a step toward freedom, even if we didn't yet know where that freedom would lead us. All we knew was that we could not stop, not now, not ever. And so, in the chaos of a storm no one saw coming, we disappeared into the night, two fugitives running from a destiny forced upon us, guided only by faith and desperate hope. When the floodwaters carried us away from the royal court, it felt like we were being pushed into another world by a force we could not see. The chaos behind us, guards shouting, sirens blaring, people slipping and screaming, faded slowly as we waded through the rising water towards the outer quarters of the palace compound. My clothes were soaked. Hannah's abaya clung tightly to her as she struggled to keep her balance, and the storm raged above us with deafening noise. But inside me, there was an unusual calm, almost like an invisible hand was guiding us step by step. Every lightning flash showed us where to run. Every strong gush of water pushed us away from danger. We didn't know where we were going, but we knew exactly where we could not stay. The flood had broken the walls of our prison, and we had only one choice: to let the waters lead us to a future we were never supposed to reach. After climbing over a collapsed security barrier, we found ourselves near the servant quarters. The storm had knocked out all electricity in the compound, leaving the area covered in darkness. Only the distant glow of lightning illuminated the buildings around us. Hannah held my hand tightly as we moved quietly through puddles and fallen debris. We could hear guards shouting orders from far behind us, trying to restore order and control, but none were close enough to notice us. The heavy rain made it difficult for anyone to see clearly, and that became our protection. We moved from one shadow to another, hiding behind walls, ducking under balconies, checking every corner before stepping forward. It felt like a scene from a dream. Unreal, wet, frightening, yet guided by something stronger than fear. The more distance we put between ourselves and the main palace, the more a strange hope grew in my chest. We reached the back gate of the palace, a rarely used service exit meant for delivery trucks. The floodwaters had pushed the metal doors halfway open. We squeezed through the gap, our hearts racing as we finally stepped outside the royal compound for the first time without permission, guards, or escorts. The storm outside was even stronger. Streets were overflowing, cars struggled to move, and people rushed in every direction to escape the flood. We blended into the chaos easily. No one expected to see royal family members walking soaked on the streets, and that worked to our advantage. We kept our heads low, running when the water allowed, and walking fast when it didn't. Every step forward felt like a victory. Every distance we put between us and the palace felt like freedom. But we also knew that if the authorities discovered we were missing, the entire city would be sealed off to find us. Hannah had memorized the address of a safe contact in Riyadh, a person connected to the underground Christian network she secretly met while abroad. She had never told me details before, But now she shared everything quickly as we moved. The address belonged to a man named Samir, a convert who had helped many others escape dangerous situations before. He lived in a simple apartment near Al-Malaz, far from the wealthy districts where our family lived. It took us almost an hour to reach the building because of the flood. But when we finally arrived, we stood outside, drenched, exhausted, and trembling from the cold. Hannah knocked on the door softly 3 times, the way she was instructed. For a moment, no one answered. Then the door opened slightly, and a man in his mid-30s looked at us with alarm. "Hannah," he whispered urgently. She nodded weakly. The man opened the door wider and pulled us inside immediately. Inside Samir's apartment, the atmosphere felt completely different from the chaos outside. Warm lights glowed softly in the living room, and a faint smell of cardamom tea filled the air. Samir locked the door behind us and helped remove our wet scarves. He didn't ask many questions at first. He only said, "You are safe here. Sit." The kindness in his voice made me feel something break inside my chest. Relief. He brought towels for us, warm blankets, and something hot to drink. My body shook from a mixture of cold, fear, and the overwhelming realization that we had actually escaped. Hannah sat beside me, wrapped in a blanket, her breathing still fast but calmer than before. Samir finally sat across from us and asked quietly, "What happened?" Hannah explained everything: the discovery of the Bible, the interrogation, the forced marriage sentence, and then the unexpected flood. Samir listened with wide eyes, shaking his head in disbelief. Once we finished telling him everything, Samir stood up and said, "This is no accident. God opened a path for you tonight." His words were gentle but full of certainty. For a moment, silence filled the room as his statement echoed inside me. I didn't know how to respond. Everything we experienced felt impossible to explain. No storm had ever hit the city so suddenly. No royal ceremony had ever been interrupted so violently. No guards had ever been so distracted that 2 members of the royal family could slip away unnoticed. Yet it all happened in one night. Samir didn't waste time. He called a trusted friend from the network, a man named Youssef, and asked him to prepare the next step of the escape. "You cannot stay in Riyadh," he said firmly. "They will search for you everywhere. You must leave the country as soon as possible." The next few hours were filled with quiet but urgent preparations. Samir gave us new clothes, simple, ordinary outfits that transformed our appearance completely. He cut Hannah's hair slightly and dyed it darker to help disguise her. He handed me a pair of glasses and trimmed my beard so I wouldn't look like the prince the palace guards knew. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Samir then handed us a small bag with the bare essentials. "No phones," he warned. "That can track you instantly." We left them behind, cutting ourselves off from everything we once knew. It felt painful, like slicing a part of our identities away, but we knew it was necessary. When the rain finally eased in the early morning, there was a knock on the door. It was Youssef, a tall man with kind eyes. "Come," he said quietly. "We leave now." The city looked different from anything I had seen before. Streets were still flooded, trees uprooted, traffic lights flickering weakly. We moved through side roads and narrow alleys, avoiding major intersections where security forces were setting up emergency checkpoints. Youssef drove with steady focus, taking routes that made no sense to me but clearly followed a safe plan. Once we reached the outskirts of Riyadh, we transferred to another car, driven by someone else from the network. Hannah asked softly, "Where will we go?" The driver replied, "To the border. From there, we keep moving." His voice carried a certainty that gave me strange comfort. We remained silent as the sun slowly rose, casting a pale light over the desert highway. Every passing minute felt like a miracle. Every kilometer away from Riyadh felt like another piece of chain breaking off our lives. The journey to the border took almost a full day because we had to avoid main roads. At one point, we hid inside a small roadside store for nearly an hour when we saw military vehicles ahead. At another point, we switched cars again after noticing a drone circling the area. Fear was constant, but so was an unexplainable sense of protection. By nightfall, we reached a quiet location near the Saudi-Jordan border. The network had arranged for a smuggler familiar with the desert paths. He didn't ask for our names. He only said, "Walk behind me. No lights, no noise. Stay close." The desert was cold, silent, and vast. Each step felt like walking deeper into the unknown, but for the first time, the unknown felt safer than the life we had left behind. When we finally crossed into Jordan, Yusuf turned to us and whispered with emotion, "You are free." In Jordan, everything felt new. The air smelled different. The people looked different. The environment had a softness that Riyadh never had. We were taken to a safe house on the outskirts of Amman, where a group of believers welcomed us with open arms. They didn't care that we were once a part of the Saudi royal family. They only cared that we were safe. For the first time in our lives, no guards watched us, no cameras followed us, no obligations controlled us. Hannah and I slept that night in a small, simple room with 2 beds. It was not luxurious, it was not grand, but it was peaceful. I closed my eyes and felt a freedom I had never known, a freedom no wealth, rank, or status could ever give. The next morning, we met a pastor who had been part of the underground network for years. He introduced himself as Pastor Michael, a gentleman with a warm smile. He spoke to us kindly and slowly, helping us understand the new journey before us. He gave us each a Bible, the first one I had ever been allowed to hold openly without fear. I ran my fingers over the cover, feeling an indescribable sense of gratitude inside me. That small book had changed my life. It had healed my body, opened my eyes, guided my steps, and saved me from darkness. Now I could read it freely, without whispers, without secrets, without hiding. Hannah sat beside me, tears flowing silently down her face as she held her own copy. It felt like we were finally living the way we were meant to. Days turned into weeks as we settled into our new life. We spent long hours studying the Bible openly, asking questions, learning, praying, and growing. Every verse that once felt mysterious now felt alive. We read about courage and found strength. We read about forgiveness and found freedom from bitterness. We read about love and felt our hearts expand with peace. Pastor Michael taught us gently, helping us understand everything we had never known growing up. He encouraged us to see our escape not as an accident, but as a divine rescue. God saved you both, he said, and he saved you for a purpose. His words reached the deepest parts of my heart. Hannah grew even stronger in her faith. She volunteered at the safe house, helping other refugees, translating documents, and comforting women who had escaped difficult situations. I watched her transform from a princess trapped by royal expectations into a woman filled with kindness and purpose. She no longer lived in fear. She no longer hid her beliefs. She prayed openly, spoke confidently, and carried peace wherever she went. Her courage inspired me daily. I realized that her journey had prepared her for this moment long before I ever understood it. She had been growing in faith quietly in Geneva, waiting for the right time to share it with me. And now we walked this path together, free from the walls that once held us captive. My own life changed more than I ever imagined. I started working with the network too, sharing my story with people who needed hope. Many of them were Muslims who had questions about faith but lived in fear of speaking openly. I didn't reveal my background or my real identity to them. I simply told them how God healed my heart, how He led me through danger, and how He saved me from a life of fear. Every time I spoke, I felt my heart grow lighter. I felt purpose. I felt meaning. For the first time in 28 years, I wasn't living for a family name or royal expectations. I was living because God gave me life, and He gave it abundantly. We lived quietly, never revealing our location to anyone in Saudi Arabia, not even distant relatives. We knew the danger was still there. We knew the royal family would never forgive what we had done. But none of that mattered anymore. Freedom came with sacrifice, but we were willing to pay the price. We built a new life, simple but peaceful. A life guided not by fear, but by love. A life shaped not by tradition, but by truth. Some nights, Hannah and I sat on the rooftop of the safe house, looking at the stars and remembering the palace we left behind. We did not feel regret. We felt gratitude. We felt relief. We felt joy. We knew we had been rescued from bondage, not by our own strength, but by God's. Now, as I share this testimony, my heart is full. I am no longer the sick prince waiting for death. I am no longer the prisoner trapped by expectations. I am a man who found healing, freedom, and truth. My life was saved physically and spiritually, and I want anyone who hears my story to know this. If God could reach us inside the most protected palace in Saudi Arabia, He can reach you wherever you are. If He could break the chains of tradition, fear, and danger around us, He can break yours too. If He could use a storm to open a path for our escape, He can open doors you never thought possible. We were captives once, but now we are free, not because of our courage, but because of His love. And that love is available to anyone who seeks it.